Hey, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time to join me here today in this short but yet punchy video class. We're going to go for approximately about 90 minutes, maybe a little bit more. My job here is to help you to become more successful as a vendor at Sheila Sterling's upcoming Wellness Expo. My name is Dale Halaway, and some of you might already know me. I'm a transformational teacher. Been teaching classes, seminars, personal development, personal growth, personal transformational, entrepreneurial empowerment type classes for actually quite a few decades at this point. I'm also a strategic advisor for companies, business owners, and entrepreneurial people alike, as well as a success coach. Success coach implying that I work with pretty much anyone and everyone that's interested in learning more about success, but more specifically on how to become more successful in a certain area of their life, whatever that might be. So to that, speaking of success, we're all vendors here. That's really one of the common denominator in us coming together here via this class on this little video. And so as a vendor, my job is to help you to become more successful, as I already mentioned. So what does that mean? Well, first of all, I have a lot of experience in this area, uniquely enough. I started doing expos back when I was a young man being in my early 20s. And I had my team, I had my own companies back then as well. And so a team of us would go in and we'd start working the floor, working the booth, as we would call it, or working our vendor position within that overall trade show or expo, and so on. And so I started back then, and from then, I don't know how many expos I've been a part of or how many trade shows I've been a part of in this way, but to say the least, a lot at this juncture. And so as a result, two things have happened for me. Number one, I found a way back in my 20s to become pretty effective at this with my team, of course. And then number two, I've noticed all kinds of interesting things that happen on the floor of that overall expo or that trade show. As in, I've always been, I suppose, amazed with the number of people who really know what they're doing. They do it well, and they get a really impressive result as a result of being at that show. Then I also see these other people who are there, good people, but don't seem to do as well. In fact, some of them downright struggle. And every now and again, you hear somebody talk about how they've lost all this money that they invested in the show or the expo. Again, I've heard this so many times over the many years of having done this, both with our own companies as well as in associating myself with other people that are also working that exact same show. So from a business standpoint, we want to take a look at pretty much anything we do business-wise where there's an investment involved. And needless to say, there's an investment here to become a vendor. There's an investment. You all know exactly what I'm talking about. So the key here is we want to look at our ROI. ROI stands for our return on investment. So if I'm investing X to rent a vendor space in this particular show, in this case, it's the Wellness Expo. If I'm investing X, well, then as a business person or as an entrepreneurial person, I'm already thinking of my return on that investment of X. And if I don't think this way, then there's a good likelihood that I'll invest X. I'll go pour all this good energy into this so-called expo as a vendor, and I'll come out on the other side with very little. In fact, I might not even recoup my investment. Again, I've heard this story over and over again from the many people that I've had the pleasure, I suppose, of having these types of conversations with while they're working the floor with their vendor spot to that of our vendor spot. So my question to you is, when you do this, could you lose money? Could you lose money? And my guess is the answer for you is yes. And perhaps you've already lost money. You've already gone to an expo, you've gone to a show where you've lost money. And so, if you were to lose money, how would you go about losing that money? How could this possibly happen? And how might that impact you? If you put X into this investment, and then you spend a couple of days also of your precious time in this investment as well, and you come out on the other side and you've lost money, how would that impact you? Or better yet, if there was a cause, if there was something that caused that to happen. So in business, I'm also a businessman. I've had many businesses throughout the years, and I consult a lot of other businesses. I coach a lot of other CEOs or business owners with their companies. And so this is something that when you're running a business, whether it's a small business, a mid-sized business, or a large business, it really doesn't matter. This is something that really is a good question. Whenever I've lost money around something that I've invested in, then I want to at least explore, examine what the cause of that might be, the cause of that loss. Why would I want to do such a thing? Well, because I want to learn from this. So as I've often said in business, there's two ways of really losing in business. One is you lose your investment, the money, the time, the resources you put into something. Two is you also miss out on the lesson. You miss out on the learning. Again, a second loss. So what I have found to be super empowering is that second one. I can step into gear anytime I wish and do something really constructive and productive with that. The first one, no matter how good we are at business, every now and again, you might find yourself investing time and resources into something where you end up losing. But again, when you lose, it doesn't have to be a double loss. It could be just a singular loss, given that second loss is, will you lose out on the lesson? You see. So the theme for this particular class that I'm doing for you, given that Sheila asked me to do this for you, thinking that this would be an additional way of serving you to assist you in you becoming more successful as a vendor in our upcoming Wellness Expo here with Sheila. And that is this, is that let's take a look at what actually happens when we're in the ditch, as I sometimes refer to it as. The ditch implying in this case, we're on the floor. We're working our booth. We're now showing up as a vendor. So how do you show up as a vendor? How do you work the booth in a way where you increase your odds of succeeding? Well, in my view, there are a number of things you want to be looking at. But the two areas that I seem to be lacking the most whenever I've worked these shows before or different expos is this, is it comes down to engagement and enrollment. An example of this would be, is you have two different vendors representing their product or service, whatever that might be, at the expo, and one vendor is really good at engaging people. The other vendor is not. And it could be the other vendor, hasn't even dawned on them yet that this would be a good thing to learn how to do, how to get better at engaging, or maybe if you're not all that good at all, then you've got to start, everybody's got to start somewhere. So in this case, we start in learning how to engage, recognizing the value or significance in good engagement. Because here's the other part of this same coin. So on one side of the coin, you have engagement. On the other side of the coin, on the other side of that same coin, you have enrollment. So if you're going to be good at enrolling, also known as selling, generating a new customer, if you're going to get good at enrolling, well, here's the deal. And again, remember, I've been doing this for a long time. Here's the deal. To get good at enrolling, first, you got to get good at engaging, because these two are like brother, sister. These two are always working together. So if I'm weak on engagement, I might be somewhat strong in enrollment, but if I don't know how to engage, I never get to that part of the process of being able to enroll. If I'm somewhat good at engagement, so I get them engaged, but if I'm not very good at enrolling, then I probably won't make the sale, or I'll make very few sales. So these two themes, they're both equally important, at least in my view, as a businessman, as somebody who has been successful in this regard. So now what I'd like to do, now we're going to take a dive into what I've prepared for you all here today in our little video, as in our class on on engagement and enrollment. How do we engage? How do we enroll? So the first thing we've got to take a look at, if we're going to be more successful as a vendor, is number one, what are we selling? What are we selling? Or what are you selling? What are you selling? So, and that could be a product, a service, whatever that might be, but there's something that we are selling. More specifically, do you know what that really is? Now, you might say, I'm selling phones, a phone. That's what you might say. And I might say, is that what you're really selling, is a phone? You might say that you're selling glasses, as in a glass. My water's in this glass right now. Is that what you're really selling? You might say you're selling technology, or maybe you're selling energy medicine, or maybe you're selling crystals, or maybe you're selling some kind of a consulting service. Maybe you're a health coach. Whatever it is, here's the catcher. Most people think they're selling the glass. Most people think they're selling the phone. Most people think they're selling the technology. Most people think they're selling coaching. Well, and you can continue on going down that path if you like. And yet the ones who are more successful at this, they're not selling technology. They're not selling the glass. They're not selling the phone. They're not selling the coaching service. Rather, what they're selling is what the coaching service does. What they're selling is what the glass does. What they're selling is what the phone does. What they're selling is what the technology does. You see the difference here? With some people, this is a game changer. It's a game changer because this is the individual who, at least to some degree, knows more about what they're really doing. And in this case, knowing that they're going to this show, they're going to this expo to sell something, whatever the something is, but to identify what that something really is. Because if you have not yet identified what that something really is, it's going to show up in your sales or the lack of, you see. Because you might be thinking you're selling the phone, and somebody on that in that exact same expo is also so-called selling a phone, but they don't show up that way. That is not their professional approach. They're selling their customers on what the phone will do, and more specifically, what it potentially can do for their customers. Very different, very, very different. So speaking of the customer, let's go to the next step. Next step, who is your customer? Have you taken the time to really drill down to identify who specifically is your customer? Now, in a moment, I'm going to tell you, or I'm going to give you another reason why this is so critically important if you're going to get good at this. So most people would say, well, everybody's my customer. Or some might say, you know, my customer are women, or my customer are men. Well, that's a start in terms of defining it a little bit more. But who is your customer? To answer this question, sometimes I'll go into a company and this becomes a game changer for them because they have not yet done this work, and it is work. And I might spend a whole day with them better identifying who their customer is. This is, again, is a game changer, everyone. It really is. Because if you are spending a lot of dollars on marketing or promoting, or you're putting a lot of energy and resources into your brand, but you have not yet identified this clearly in the most definable of ways for you, in a way that's unique to you, not that it's bad, but you'll only get half of what you deserve. In other words, you'll miss out on other opportunities with other potential customers because you're possibly focusing your energy, directing your energy on people that you shouldn't even be focusing your energy on. In other words, it's not in your best interest to do so. So, and everybody that's in the marketplace or working commerce, everybody has a customer. Everybody does. So we don't have the whole day to drill down on this, but I'm going to spend the next couple of minutes at least giving you a couple little golden nuggets on what might help you the most right now to get clearer on who your customer actually is. So here's a question. Now, this is actually more related to your customer, but it's really for you, the vendor. When you think of your customer, what would you say is absolutely most important to your customer? What is it that would be most important to your customer? And more specifically, about the thing you're selling. So, an example, you might say, well, what's most important to my customer is they have a happy marriage. But you're not a coach. You're not a teacher. You're selling some kind of a technology that helps people to become well again. Well, that's not your customer. Again, what is most important to your customer about the thing that you're actually selling? So going back to question number one, what are you selling? And once you drill down on that, then question number two, who is your customer? Well, what is the most important thing to your customer? To your customer. This is huge now. This is really huge, because once you start to dive into and begin to explore, okay, to my customer, what would be most important to them about the very thing, about the very product, about the very service that I'm selling? This is called making a connection. This is called the business owner making a deeper connection to what it is that they sell and why their customer wants it or needs it. Yeah, big stuff. Another way to look at this would be this. What is it costing them, meaning your customer, what is it costing them to not have this thing? Whatever this thing is that you're marketing, whatever this thing is that you're promoting, whatever this thing is you want to talk about at the coming expo. What is it costing your customer, whoever your customer is, to not even have this thing? This is another powerful, transformative question. If you can answer this, and if you can't, then sometimes these questions, the value that they bring to you is it lights you up. It lights you up and it kind of illuminates your own pathway. So now you start to be with this question. You let this question kind of guide you. Okay, what is it that's costing my customers to not have this thing that I'm selling or I'm promoting? What is it? What is it that's costing them? Right? Because if I can come to know this, whatever this really is, whoa, this in itself, again, makes another difference when it comes to my way in approaching my potential customer. How I approach them, what I say to them, the questions I'm going to ask them when I'm engaging them, you see. Again, this is, and as we go a little further, you're going to see how this, everything I'm going to do with you here today is just, it's going to connect to the next piece, to the next piece, how I've designed this for you today, which is how I design all my programs that I do, whether it's 90 minutes long or quite frankly, 5 days long for a company or for the general public, whenever I'm doing a general public class or a 5-day long boot camp or seminar for the general public. And I always do them sequentially. So I'm always breaking this down. We're going a little further, we're going a little deeper, but we're doing it sequentially, progressively, so that you can start to wrap your brain around these powerful teachings, these, in this case, these powerful questions, and really start to integrate them, work with them, let them start to work with you, because they will if you let it. And you'll learn all kinds of cool things about you as a business person, about you as an entrepreneur, in this case, about you as a vendor. Where are you really at as a vendor? How are you showing up as a vendor? How are you approaching this business of yours as a vendor coming into this next expo here with Sheila Sterling? Okay, so let's go to the next step here. And that is, as for us as a vendor, we need to answer this question if we haven't already, and that is, what's our offer? What's our offer going to be when we're at this coming show? Now, once again, as I said, I've done this hundreds of times over and over again throughout the decades, and I find this quite fascinating. So some vendors, they really know how to do this, and they know how to do it really well. And other vendors, they're just not all that good at it. In fact, some vendors downright suck at this. I know. It really is interesting to me that you would think that when you're investing this kind of money, that you either would have a coach or a mentor or some kind of a teacher, or you will have already learned how to do this, maybe the hard way, or maybe you're rubbing shoulders with another vendor who really knows what they're doing, and you're reaching out to them for some kind of guidance or something so that you can get better at it. But yet some people, they don't show up that way. Some do and some don't, of course. But what is your offer? Now, your offer is going to be very specific, or in my view, it needs to be specific to this show, to this expo. So this requires some thought on a strategic level. What is your offer? What is your offer that you're going to create and ultimately present to the people that show up at your booth in the coming expo? What is your offer? Now, you want to really break this down, and you also want to make it exciting, and you want to make it meaningful. In other words, believe it or not, there is an art to doing this. So the objective here, when you're creating an offer for your expo audience, would be this, or this question to answer: is my offer irresistible? Is my offer irresistible? What that implies is that if my offer is more irresistible, it becomes more challenging for the person I'm making the offer to say no to it. The more irresistible my offer becomes, what happens, I increase the likelihood of more people that I end up engaging in my booth to basically say yes to the offer, you see. So when I show up at a show with my team, and the booth is now all set up and we're ready to go at showtime and so on and so forth, and we start working the booth. Well, while we're doing this, we've done all this work leading up to the actual working of the booth. And part of that work is to identify, is to create what's our offer going to be. And what's interesting, from show to show, sometimes, in fact, many times, we change up the offer. But the offer is such where the offer becomes irresistible to whoever the potential customer is going to be. Whereas when I'm working that show, one of the things that I'll sometimes do, I'll work the floor, meaning I'll go out and I'll meet up with some of the vendors, or sometimes I'll just stand there and I'll observe. Remember, I've been a coach, I've been a consultant, I'm a teacher, and so on and so forth. So sometimes the person won't even know I'm observing them. Sometimes they do, because I'll go up and I'll introduce myself. But most times I don't. I'm just observing. And it's, again, quite fascinating, because some of the vendors, they haven't even taken the time to create any kind of an offer, let alone it being irresistible. Now, some of the vendors are very impressive. They have taken the time. They took the time before they even showed up at that expo to create this offer, and not just an offer, but an offer that then becomes irresistible to that of their potential customer or client that shows up in their booth or around their booth during the course of that time in which we're all together as vendors. So now that leads us to the next part, again, as a vendor. So, and this part has to do with our sales objectives. Our sales objectives. So with some vendors that end up losing money, every now and again, they'll come up to me, because at some point when we're working the floor and I'm a vendor, because I also speak at a lot of these conferences as well, or teach, and so they get to know me, and next thing you know, they come by our booth and we end up having a short conversation together. And I'll ask them, how long have you been doing this for? Meaning the vendor thing for. And they'll tell me a year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. How's it been working for you? Well, when I started, actually, it was working better for me at the beginning than it is now. And I'll ask them to explain even further. Tell me more. And they'll start telling me more because they know they've had a front row seat into their own life in this way. And so I'm just merely asking questions as a way to then listen to anything that rolls off the tip of their tongue that might be a Freudian slip, meaning something that I'm going to notice, that I'm going to be able to reflect back to them, that then is going to help them. In other words, they're going to have an aha. They're going to learn something of value or of significance to that of them and their approach as a vendor, just ongoing. So one of the questions I'll ask vendors from time to time when they're sharing with me from their experience, prior to coming to this show, or prior to coming to that show a month ago, if I'm now having a conversation with them, what were your sales objectives? And no kidding, some of them will just, they don't even know how to answer the question. There's no answer. There's no answer. Or some will start to try to answer, but they're mumbling and jumbling with trying to grasp onto some word to explain whatever it is that they're thinking. And in fact, some cases, people don't even know what the sales objective might be. Interesting. And yet they're investing money, time, and resources into this vendor experience. Wow. Wow, as I often say. From a business standpoint, if this is how we do business, where we don't identify sales objectives, then at some point we might not have a business. In fact, the only thing that now is going to keep our business alive is either we've got deep pockets to keep on funding the business, or we know if somebody's got deep pockets that's willing to fund us. One or the other. Because the sales objective is really where it starts. I know I've already given you a couple of points leading into this, but the sales objective is really where it begins. So when I'm going into a show with my team, you know, one of the first things I do, I start considering, okay, what are the sales objectives here? In other words, what do we hope to accomplish when this is all done? What do we want to walk away from that expo experience with? Do we just want to walk away with our stuff that we brought with us to the expo? Is that it? You know, when we're all doing the loadout at the end of the expo, we're all tired and hopefully somewhat happy because we've had a good show. We really succeeded. But you and I both know that's not always the case with some of the vendors. So I ask you, what are your sales objectives for this coming expo with Sheila? What are they? I'll give you a couple examples as a way to further stimulate this. So you might decide one of your sales, and notice I'm using the word sales. I've used this word now a couple of times. I'm doing this on purpose. And a little later on, I'm going to explain why this is so important or why this could be important for you. So a sales objective could be a certain number of new customers that I want to generate for my company or the company that I'm representing during the course of this expo. So depending on my ability, and I know my ability, I know how good I am at closing, I know how good I am at generating customers, whatever that is, coupled with the theme of this show that I've enrolled myself in as a vendor, who's going to be there, meaning who are the customers, who's the traffic, who's the consumer that's going to be there. And I combine all that and I kind of just feel into it intentionally wise. Okay, so a number for me might be 10 new customers. Now, when I say new customers, I'm talking about paying customers. I'm talking about individuals who invest in my product or service during that show. During that show. So you want to be realistic with yourself, and yet you might want to also cause yourself to stretch a tad, you and your team, if you have a team of people that's also supporting you, right? So you might say 5 new paying customers. You might say 10 new paying customers, or whatever the number is. This is something you've got to come to terms with or feel into, and then decide what's most real for you. So that's one example of a sales objective. Another example would be new contacts of influence. So one of the beauties of attending an expo or a show is you get to meet some very interesting people, implying the type of people that are well connected, they're well networked, and somehow, some way, the two of you end up meeting at this expo, and next thing you know, you're exchanging numbers, and you're gonna get together for a cup of coffee or a glass of juice a week or two later, or you can get on a Zoom meeting, and you're going to talk about how you might collaborate, or how this other person might assist you in furthering the expansion of your brand, whatever that might be. So it could be that. Maybe you identify that coming to the show that you would like to generate maybe 2 new contacts of influence. 2 people that are influential that could help you by opening up some doorway to somebody else. And then they do so, and next thing you know, you have generated not only another customer, but maybe an even greater customer, a customer that's willing and ready to go for more of your product, more of your service, you see. It could be that, as another sales objective, that you want to strengthen or build your brand. Your brand around your service or product. Maybe that's what it is, because you're going to get some exposure. There's no doubt about it, especially if you learn how to engage, or you're really good at engagement and also good at enrollment. So maybe that's the opportunity. Maybe that's the big objective for you, to strengthen or build upon, increase your brand for your service and your product as a result of this expo or trade show. Maybe it's to help build your database. One of the things that we've always done is build our database as a result of whatever show that we go into. And we'll come out with X number of prospects, as in warmer prospects, might I add. These are people that we found a way to connect with. They connected with us. And in a moment, I'm going to break that down for you as well, too, in this class. But here's the deal, is if you come out of an expo and you've come out with, we'll say, 100 warm leads from that expo for your product and service. So I say warm leads. In other words, these have not been converted to paying customers just yet, but they're warm leads. Those leads then go into your database. This gives you an opportunity to further cultivate the relationship between those individuals on that list of 100 leads, so to speak, and you and your company. It could be that you've set yourself an objective. I want to come into this expo and I want to identify or meet up with 10, remember I use that term, warm prospects, in this case, 10 warm, genuine prospects for me to follow up with, like literally in the first couple of days after the expo. That could be an objective too. So you're now going into the show with a very specific intention. You're now being intentional. You're being intentional where you've said to yourself and to your team and you and your 2 or 3 other people that you possibly have with you, you've spoken about this, you've drilled this down, you've all come to this place of agreement. In other words, it feels really right. And you're looking for 10 genuine prospects that you and your team can immediately follow up with within 48 hours of that expo ending, and generate some new customers, some new paying customers as a result of this. Okay, so let's go to the next teaching here. And that is this. Speaking of intention, I call this intentionally working the booth. Intentionally working the booth. So your booth, just like everyone's booth, some of the booths, first of all, they look amazing because you have somebody in there who, is really creative. So in our company, we have our own creative director, and she's just amazing when it comes to her creativity and her work. So she's really the one that really designs our booth space, which we always get comments on, positive comments on. So maybe you have somebody like that in your company, or maybe you are that person. Whatever it is, so you want your booth to be visually appealing. You want your booth to be somewhat warm, easy to approach. But more specifically, when I say intentionally working the booth, now I'm going to come back to that theme. This is where those two themes, as in engagement and enrollment, will show themselves. If I'm really good as a vendor at engagement and enrollment, I will shine brightly in this coming show. If I'm not that good at engagement and or enrollment, then the light won't be as bright, period. Because this is where it really shows how we actually work the booth. So in working the booth, I have a question for you to get us started here. So as a professional vendor, on a scale of 1 to 10, how engaging would you say you currently are? Would you be a 10, 10 being really engaging? Would you be a 1, not all that good? Or might you be a 5 or somewhere in between that 1 and 10? What number would you give yourself? How engaging are you in current time? And if you're not sure, look at your results from the last expo or trade show you did. How engaging were you then? 1 to 10. Or if this is your first time doing a show, then just look at your life as a professional, as a career professional. When you're in your office working with other colleagues, when you're in your office on the phone with a potential customer, how engaging would you say you have been? 1 to 10, 10 being really engaging, 1 being not so engaging, or a number somewhere in between. Now, this is a really important question to ultimately answer and also continue to work with. Because ideally, you want to be a 9 or a 10. You want to be a 9 or 10. And especially when you're showing up as a vendor and working an expo or a trade show. Because here's the deal. When people are walking by your booth, so we call that also traffic or the consumers, they're walking by your booth. So when you're working the booth, there's two dynamics with the booth. There's what happens inside the booth. So for those of us that stand behind our table, so to speak, and we just stand there, we're basically waiting for somebody to come up to the table. It's like the retail salesman or salesperson or saleswoman, right? The retail saleswoman, she just waits in the store until somebody shows up in the store to where maybe now she's going to approach them, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. If that's your style of selling, then that's your style of selling. So that type of person more than likely would stand behind the booth or behind the table and wait for somebody to approach them. In other words, wait for somebody to come up to the table. Then there's a second dynamic. The second dynamic is what's called the outer bubble, or what I call the outer bubble of the booth. The outer bubble of the booth is a zone, if you will. It's an energetic zone that extends itself outside of the front of the booth, a good anywhere from 10 to 20, maybe even 30 feet out. All depends on how strong you are at this, how good you become at this. That outer side of the booth, this is where, if you really want to increase your sales, if that's one of your sales objectives, this is where you most certainly will increase the likelihood of you generating more paying customers. Now, this is not for everybody. I get it, because I've had people say to me, no, I'm not going to do that. That's way too scary. And then others will say, I want to do this. I don't know how, please teach me, or will you teach me? Show me how to do this and I will do it. In other words, they're not as afraid. Some people are more afraid or more uncomfortable with doing that, meaning they like to work behind the booth, behind that table, and others like the idea of working in front of the booth. Some take it on as a challenge. They say, whoa, sign me up for this one because I see an opportunity for me to grow and expand myself. I want to learn how to do this. And especially when I see the results that can come from this as I get better at this. So what happens on the outside of your booth, going back to that idea of traffic. So traffic is in the consumers that are attending the conference, that are attending the expo. They're coming because, you know, they're doing one of two things. They're either coming to do some window shopping. Sometimes in sales we call them the tire kickers. So they already know in advance they're not going to buy anything, so to speak. Some of them end up buying something anyways. But for the most part, they already know in advance they're not going to buy anything. They're coming to window shop. Then there's others that are coming to the show where they're looking for something. And quite frankly, they might not even be aware of what they're looking for. That's where you get the more experienced vendor. The more experienced vendor will be able to tap into that and be able to help that potential buyer recognize what it was they were actually looking for. I'll circle back on that a little later on before our time's up here today. So when the traffic is walking by our booth, in sales, we call this pattern interrupt, which means interrupting the flow on purpose. So people are just walking by. They're walking by and they're having a conversation maybe with their friend or their partner or whoever that is as they're walking by. And when we're working outside of the booth in that zone I alluded to, when we're doing that, then those people who do this, it's important that they understand this pattern interrupt. What we're going to do now is we're going to interrupt the pattern of whatever they've got going on. Now, we're going to do it gracefully and professionally and kindly and lovingly and consciously and responsibly, of course. But we're going to specifically and purposefully interrupt the pattern. How might you do that? Because remember, if I'm possibly going to have a chance at meeting up with my new paying customer, it could very well be that person is in that traffic flow that's literally approaching my booth. In other words, they're only 5 feet away from the booth now. And they're about to come right into that zone in my booth, or in the front of my booth, shall I say. And if I don't interrupt that pattern, the odds are they're just going to walk right on by. So I now have an opportunity to interrupt that pattern. To do so, there's a number of ways to go about doing this. And again, to do it very kindly and respectfully, but there's a number of ways, I assure you. One of the ways is this, is to do something that immediately grabs their attention or catches their attention. And something that I have found very effective, something that's natural, it's organic, everybody is A-okay with it, and that is to find something that they're actually wearing on their body. That could be a nice piece of jewelry. That could be something really unique on the jacket they're wearing. Maybe it's been hand stitched. Maybe it's the way they're walking. Maybe it's the way they're engaging in conversation with somebody else that they're walking beside. Whatever it is, you're going to look for something that's kind of a standout. And then, or the way that they just did something. Again, going back to maybe they've really engaged somebody, or maybe I remember one time we were working a show and a lady was approaching the booth, and our booth that is, and she was maybe 10, 15 feet away and she fell down and she hit her head. And so I just happened to catch it on the side of my eye. I was actually coaching somebody else. I was working the front of the booth. Where I sit, we have a chair just off to the side of my booth or our booth, and I sit there and I'll answer people's questions. I'll provide a little coaching for them. I do all kinds of things just as a free service. And sometimes people get lined up and there's 4 or 5 people waiting to present their question to me or whatever that might be from time to time. Well, that's what I was doing during this particular time. And from the corner of my eye, I see this lady fall. And I'm in midstream. I'm in midstream with this person that I'm connecting with now, but I see this happen. I just immediately say, excuse me for a moment. I get up from my chair and I move over to her like that quick. And right away, I don't move her. I don't touch her. I check in with her just to see how she's doing, to see if she needs any emergency help or medical help, and that type of thing. Long story short, that resulted, so she never became a customer, but that resulted in my act to do that only because I saw it and I acted on it quickly and I approached it in a way that ultimately helped her. So even though this woman didn't purchase anything from us, I don't think she even ended up on our database. But what she did in exchange, later on, she introduced me to somebody. And that somebody then introduced me to somebody that then became a customer. So now I didn't plan that all out, of course. I just simply was paying attention. I was paying attention to something that this person just did or just experienced, and I responded to it in the way that I just shared, and then it resulted in what it resulted, as I just said. And of course, the woman was okay ultimately. She did not require medical attention. Took, I don't know, maybe 5 minutes or so just for her, to get back in alignment with her own bearings and start to feel somewhat oriented again in her own body and so on and so forth. But then later on, these next 2 events would happen. She would introduce me to somebody, that person would introduce me to somebody that then became a paying customer. Again, I never planned that, but these are the types of things that can happen when you're working a show. When somebody is approaching again your booth and you notice something very specific about them, whatever that might be. As they're coming towards you and perhaps kind of like right in alignment. So you're standing here and they're walking by you here. As they're walking by you here, at some point, you make a comment about that creative stitching on that person's jacket. As in like, wow, that's not only an amazing jacket, but how did you come up with that incredible design on your jacket? See what I just did? I engaged them. And more specifically, I engaged them in something where they're going to say, I don't want to talk to you. I don't like my jacket. No, nobody does that. I engaged them on something that was specific and personal to them. I can do the same thing with a piece of jewelry. And again, once you dial into this and you start practicing this, you'd be amazed how your own creativity will start to flow through you. And next thing you know, you'll just, in that moment, you'll say something completely new, something different, because you'll spot something on that person, whatever that might be. Heck, it could be their shoes. It could be their shoes. There's something rather unique about their shoes. But you don't just make the statement, you ask the question. That's what interrupts the pattern. It's really the question. Now, it can't be any question like, how's the weather? It's to make it really personal to them. So again, as you get more experience with this, if you don't already know how to do this, you get more experience and you're able to dial in rather quickly to what is it about that person that you can comment on, but in the form of a question. Gosh, I love that piece you're just wearing around your neck. Who's your jeweler? Or did you design that yourself? Or how much energy did it take to design that piece of jewelry? See what I'm doing? I'm engaging them. I'm engaging them to respond to me. And again, because it's so personal, everybody responds. It's the most amazing, beautiful dynamic. Totally divine. It works, and it works like magic. You just need to know what it is and then how to work it. And then you got to go and practice it You might goof it up a couple of times on the first couple of rounds if you've never done this before. But I promise you, if you stay with it, you're gonna dial in. You're gonna dial in, and all of a sudden you're gonna have your first victory. And you're like, whoa, this is really cool. And what makes it so cool is that that would have never happened had you have just sat behind the booth, behind your table, with that person that's in their pattern. They're just going to walk by your booth. Because remember, when people show up at these shows, they're either showing up to window shop or they're showing up with something specific in mind that they already know. Maybe they're coming to buy crystals. Maybe they're coming to purchase some kind of a foot detox, a good quality foot detox machine, or maybe some piece of technology that's going to accomplish something for them. That could very well be. Then there's that other group that I highlighted that's coming that they don't even know what they're looking for, yet they're looking for something. They're looking for something. And so the way I've always viewed it, my job then becomes, how can I help them to identify what it is that they already know somewhere deep within them that they're looking for? Because if I can help identify that and they connect with it, you tell me what happens next. You see? Again, engagement. So now when we look at enrollment here on this, then the next piece that comes into play is rapport. I have a number of pillars that I teach when I'm teaching on sales or on enrollment, where we have like literally 2 or 3 days nonstop, 8 or 9 hours a day of teaching. And so I've created a whole sequence of pillars that what I have found that if you want to get better at enrolling, if you want to get better at selling, you want to know what these pillars are. And there's a chance at least some of them you already know. But one of these pillars is known as the pillar of rapport building or establishing rapport. Now understand, when you're working your booth, you only have a couple of minutes here. It's not like you're in their office or in their home or they're in your office and you guys are going to spend a good hour and a half together. When you're working the booth and this traffic is flowing, the reality is you probably have 5 or 10 minutes. It might go to 20 minutes, depending on what happens in that conversation. But you only have so much time. And quite frankly, you don't want to take too much more time than what I just posted or said, because if you do that, then, other potential customers are walking by your booth. So obviously there's a balance to this thing. There's a rhythm to this thing, and that'll come over time with more experience of having done this thing, and coupled with, having access to these kinds of teachings, these kinds of principles, these kinds of techniques that can further support you in your own empowerment to get better at this sort of thing. So this rapport. So again, because our time is very limited here today. So when we look at the pillar of rapport, which at this place, what we've got to do is we've got to be able to establish rapport with whoever if we're going to enroll them into our product or service, that is. We've got to establish rapport, and we've got to be able to do it rather quickly for the reasons I just said. So there's a number of ways in how you can do this, but one of them is, we all are familiar with the word flattery. Flattery. This is where you could purposely and gracefully use flattery. Flattery as in, once again, going back to when I was talking about grabbing their attention and breaking up that pattern interrupt, or that pattern by specifically interrupting it. And that is this, is pay attention to something about them in this case, something about them. So that could be anything from their smile. Some people just have $1 million smile. Some people just have a beautiful smile. Actually, I think everybody does to some degree, but some people, it's just like that is one of their qualities. There is no doubt about it. So maybe you comment on that. Maybe it's the way they're dressing. Maybe it's the suit. Whatever that might be. I remember actually at one of Sheila's shows, this was a year ago or so, and there was a lady there. She came into my talk, and she was out of state. She flew in, and she was coming here, and she was definitely a business professional. She wore business attire. She came into my talk and sat towards the back. She took copious notes as I spoke that day. And now she didn't come up to the booth here right away. It wasn't until later in the day where our paths would cross again. And when they crossed again, one of the first things that I commented on in terms of establishing rapport with her, beyond her showing up in the talk, because She saw me, she recognized me right away, commented on, she was in my talk earlier that day. She really enjoyed it. Since she had gone to other talks, she thought it was the best talk of the day for her. And then I asked her, well, why might that be? She said, well, I'm a business professional. And when I walked in and I saw you, I right away, it's like I was looking at myself. I could tell that you weren't like a lot of the other teachers here. Even though you taught us something different, you didn't teach us on business, but I could tell you are a business professional. And I really respect that. So this is her talking. And then to that, I had, because now it was me trying, again, I'm going to move in and establish a little more rapport. So I notice what she's wearing and I comment on her business attire. She then in return says, thank you for noticing. Wow. Thank you for noticing. In other words, that meant something to her. I didn't ask her what it meant at all. I just knew based on her response that meant something. I took the time to notice something about her. It's flattering. It was all done professionally, but it's flattering. You might notice their purse. Some women, believe it or not, well, if I'm speaking to a lot of women right now, you already know what I'm talking about. Most women put a lot of energy into the choice that they make around a purse. It's like men, believe it or not, men put a lot of energy into the type of shoes they wear. So that I've known for a coon's age. And so sometimes you might comment on the woman's purse. You might comment on the man's shoes. Like, wow, Dale, that's a really amazing pair of shoes that you're wearing there. And for me, that was a really standout. Like, where did you get them? Notice how I did that. Gosh, Dale, that's an amazing pair of shoes that you're wearing there. That was a really standout for me. Hey, where did you get them? Implying that I'm curious. I'm genuinely curious that maybe I want to buy, if I'm a man, I want to buy the same pair of shoes. I guarantee you, you're going to get an immediate response from the person and they're going to like you. All of a sudden, they're going to like you because you're asking that, you're saying something about them. And then in my case, because I'm really big on questions, when I'm teaching people, I'm really big on not just questions, but the right kind of question. And you can probably already tell that at this juncture. So when I do this, right, it immediately gets a response. The person lights up, they smile. The woman about her business attire, she was already in my talk. She already kind of liked me, so to speak, as a teacher, as a business person. So now I'm doing something very specific that, well, now I'm really starting to like you, right? What does that do? I not only get a response from her, I get a response from him because I commented on his shoes, but I have this curious tone that I'm interested, like, where did you get the shoes? Implying that I'm probably going to go and get a pair of those shoes. I mean, I'm really wowed by them. This in itself, it starts a little bit of a conversation, but what it does, it begins this establishing of rapport. Obviously, I'm taking a little more time on this purposely here in this class as I'm sharing this with you. But when I'm on the floor or when my team's on the floor, this all happens in like seconds. It all happens in seconds and it has this natural flow to it. And whoever the potential buyer is, they're right into it. How could they not be right into it? How could they not be right into it? But here's another idea with respect to working the booth or in this case, enrolling people as you've engaged them. So you've engaged them, you're kind of crossing over to where you're enrolling them. And so another golden nugget here is when you can get your prospect to say yes. The moment the prospect or potential buyer starts saying yes to us, what that is, that's all internal. That's all internal. And so, in other words, they're now agreeing with you. They're agreeing with you. And this is where, if we're going to make a sale or if we're going to generate a new paying customer for our product or service, if that's going to be our truth, this is a part of the process. Part of the process is that whoever that person is, and I'm not talking about twisting them or manipulating them. That's not the message here at all. I'm talking about when you are connecting with them And especially when you begin to cross over into the enrollment process where you've engaged them in a process where you're enrolling them. You're enrolling them slowly but surely into why your product, why your service would be beneficial for them to have. Not for you to have, for them to have. You see? And so to get there, one of the things on a psychological level, and this is known, by the way, this has been tested many times, and that is that as they move into alignment, in other words, you're getting closer and closer to making the decision to invest in our product or service, you'll see it if you really know what you're looking for, that person will start saying yes to you. So what I discovered long ago in my career, long ago, is this. The sooner you get them saying yes, the more likelihood is that they will become a paying customer. So, for example, when I'm using Flattery, they're giving me a small yes because what I just did, they're in agreement with. In fact, when I broke the pattern, I interrupted their pattern, I started doing it right there. I literally did something, at least the way I taught it here today, I did something that causes them to just feel good about what I just did. So they're already in somewhat of alignment with me because they're saying yes to my question. The question I just asked, the way I position that question, the way I asked that question, it puts them in what I've referred to over the years as into a minor sequencing of yeses. So these are minor yeses. The major yes would be they say yes to your wonderful product or service. And they're willing to pull out their credit card or their checkbook or cash or whatever that might be, and they take care of the financial part. That's when you know you've really generated a paying customer, is when that transaction actually occurs. But what's all required of us in order to lead it, facilitate the process to that place where this person is willing to part with their credit card, part with their money, as we say, for our product and service. So this idea of getting this minor yes versus waiting for this thing where you're going to get the major yes. The major yes, yes, Dale, I'm ready to invest $10,000 in your service. I'm not saying that would never happen, but it doesn't happen a lot because of these minor yeses that also need to come into place. Now, with everybody, it's going to be different. With some people, they're going to need to have 5 minor yeses. Others are going to be 10 minor yeses. Others are going to be 20 minor yeses. But if there's a genuineness here in terms of our connection, and more specifically, or more importantly, there really is a great benefit for this potential customer that they're going to gain as a result of investing in our product or service. If that is really true, then 2 things. Number 1, we're going to need those minor yeses that'll lead us to the major yes. And number 2, the sooner we can get to the minor yeses, the better off this whole thing's going to be. Meaning it's going to be richer. And it most certainly is going to help us in this process of enrolling them into that of our wonderful product and service, or better yet, into the benefits that they're going to gain and experience from the investing of our products and services. Okay, let's go to the next step. The next step here is what's our giveaway? So as a vendor working the booth, we want to think through, if we haven't already, what's the giveaway going to be? What are we going to give away for free? What are we going to give away for free? And you can do this in one of a couple of ways, which I'll circle back on here in a moment. But the giveaway, kind of like the offer, when it becomes irresistible, becomes magnetic. The giveaway, when it becomes the right giveaway for that show, it too serves as a magnet, meaning it will magnetize people to your booth, to your vendor space. So what's the giveaway? Well, this you want to be unique. You also want to be creative. If you wanted to trace back to them having some kind of an experience which I always recommend, but trace back to some kind of experience with your product or service, then that becomes the design of your giveaway. Your giveaway, if you go back to your sales objectives, if you really do want to, as a sales objective that is, build your database by generating more people to then input into your database as a result of this show or expo, then what you might consider doing is have a free drawing. Have a free drawing that has something to do with your product or service, but in exchange, this is where you get their name and information, as in their phone number, their email address, and so on. All of a sudden now you have a guaranteed way, because by the end of the show, if you end up with, once again, I don't know, 100 names in your fishbowl around your drawing, well, that's 100 names with a little bit of their personal information, their first and last name, their phone number, or the best number to contact, and their best email address. So now you take all that information and you input it into your database. Bingo, now you've accomplished that as a sales objective. That could be worth something. Could be worth something, and especially if you're really good now at cultivating the relationship moving forward with those people. So what's your giveaway? What's your giveaway? How are you going to present it? Will it be a giveaway you do with everybody that shows up at your booth? Or will it be a giveaway through that of a draw like I just suggested? Or will you have some kind of a combination? That's all up to you. You get to be creative here. You get to be creatively strategic, and do be creatively strategic about this. In other words, strategic means you're going to think this through. You're going to take the time to really think it through. How do you want to design this? And whatever you're designing, always think of the outcome. Like, what is the outcome that you're intending to accomplish here? So when you're doing the draw, what is the outcome? When you are just doing a free giveaway, what is the outcome? What is the outcome that you're hoping for or intending for here? Get really clear on what that is. And then from that, if you don't already have an idea as to what you're going to do next, in terms of the draw or just a free gift that everybody's going to get when they show up at your booth, or a little bit of both, whatever that is, then that's when you start to design it, once you get clear on that outcome. Okay, let's go to the next point here I'd like to touch on in our time together. And that is this idea of enrollment. So the principle is this. And now remember, everybody, again, I've said this 3 times probably. I'll say it one final time. I've been doing this for a long time, like long, long time. I've done this thousands of times, meaning I've given thousands of seminars and courses. And when I'm working with business people or salespeople, especially with the professional salespeople, or the professional enrollers, because the enroller, there's enrollers and then there's professional salespeople. You could say they're one of the same, because the enroller that becomes really good is also selling. It's also known as selling. But here's the principle. Here's the principle that I wish to emphasize here in our class. And that is everyone needs to be enrolled. Actually, everyone wants to be enrolled. Because I've done this for as long as I have proven this over and over and over again. Everyone wants to be enrolled. How have I proven this? Well, with my many different companies, we've made tons of sales with happy, satisfied customers. How is that? Because on the other side, when the sale's actually made, some of those customers will say things like, gosh, I'm so glad you were so persistent with me in constantly reaching out to me, calling me, finally getting me, and then finally getting this appointment, and then finally having this happen now. Meaning I now am the proud owner of your product or service, and I'm now benefiting from it. And I like the way I'm benefiting from it a lot. And then they'll say, the way you did this, or the way your company approaches this, I really enjoyed it. I like it. What are they saying? Deep down within our psyche, we all When it comes to purchasing something, we all want to be sold. We all want to be enrolled, period. And when we can wrap our brain around that and begin to have that be reflected in our approach in building and growing our businesses as vendors, you'd be amazed at how just this in itself will make a nice difference for you. Because now you're literally speaking in a way that speaks directly to the psyche of your potential buyer around this idea that, hey, wait a minute, don't assume that I'm just going to buy because you're standing on the other side of the counter. If I buy, I'm going to buy because you're going to work. And part of what you need to do, you need to enroll me. You need to sell me. Now, of course, most customers out loud are never going to say that. But think of yourself. Think of yourself. Put yourself in the position of the customer. You probably want to be enrolled too. When you're in that mode and you're deciding, should I or shouldn't I? Should I or shouldn't I? Back and forth. Well, if you're fully enrolled or fully sold, it's a no-brainer. The decision is really easy to make. If you're not completely enrolled, if you're not completely sold, well, then you could be sitting on the fence. 1 foot in, 1 foot out. Should I, shouldn't I? Should I or shouldn't I? But once you have been enrolled, once you have been sold, and even though I know you probably don't use that kind of language, and I don't even use that language. Well, no, that's not true. Even as somebody, when I'm being sold something, because of who I am, if they only knew me and they knew how to really work with me, they'd make sale after sale after sale. But most of them don't, partly because they haven't been trained. Or maybe they don't want to be trained. Maybe they think they know it all already, and they don't realize how much of an art or mastery comes into play as the professional really gets good at this, meaning really good at enrolling or selling. So here, I want to emphasize just a couple of things here on this point, and that is this. And this is a really important piece. It's a deeper piece, and that is, for you, what do you think of when you think of a salesperson? What do you think of when you think of a salesperson or an enroller, an assigned professional enroller? What do you think of? Be honest with yourself. Be honest. In fact, be brutally honest here. I promise you this will serve you really well. Because whatever your answer, that's what you end up projecting on your potential buyer. In psychology, it's known as energy transference. Yeah. It's amazing how few salespeople even know what it is I just shared with you all here. What happens is the way I view the salesperson, the way I view selling or enrolling, the way I view it, not the way you view it, the way I view it, without me even trying. Now, if I'm in a selling situation or an enrolling situation called I'm a vendor at an expo, and I'm to be connecting with potential new buyers, then what I'm going to do, without me even knowing it, I'm going to begin to project my perception of what I think salespeople are, what I think enrollers are, onto whoever it is that I'm attempting to connect with right now. Now, I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm not even saying that's a good thing. What I'm saying is if you want to get better at this, you want to address this. You want to address this, and you want to address it sooner than later. Because this is real. It happens whether we are aware of it or not. So if it turns out to be my truth, and this is what you got to decide for yourself, but if it turns out to be my truth, that I really do and am to get better at this, better at selling and enrolling, in other words, converting prospects to paying customers, satisfied customers for my product and service when I'm working my booth, when I'm showing up as a professional vendor at the coming expo. So if that's my truth, then this will serve me impeccably well. And I'm not even saying this is even easy to do. I'm saying that if you get engaged in this, this is going to be a process. I only say that because I have trained thousands upon thousands of salespeople and professional enrollers throughout my career. And I got to tell you, this is an ongoing process. It's an ongoing process. The ones who are really at the top of their game, they've mastered it. The ones that are on their way up, rising up to becoming at the top of their game, they're in process of mastering it, assuming that they're even aware of this and are choosing to learn how to really transform themselves in this way, to where their perception of the salesperson, their perception of the enroller, it's constantly being leveled up. Their own inner perception, that is constantly being leveled up. For as it does, you'll see the difference it makes when they're out connecting with potential buyers for their product or service, as it'll start to improve upon the quality. It starts to improve upon the quality of the conversations that they enroll or engage their potential buyers into. It shows up in terms of the quality of the results they get. I mean, it is, you could say this is a game changer. This is more the inner, what we call the inner game of selling, or the inner game of enrolling, implying there's both an inner game and then there's an outer game. So obviously I'm going back and forth a little bit here for you in our little video here today. So a couple other things to consider. And again, we could spend days on this, but questions. Questions are a master key, again, if we're going to get really good at this. Questions. And it's not just questions, it's the right question. It's the right question asked in the right way at the right time. So I've given you a couple of little examples of that earlier on, where how I might approach it in a real type situation, and how I take what I'm making also as a compliment statement, and then I turn it in a natural way into a question, which then gets an immediate response. It's that response, that's where the engagement occurs. That's where now they become engaged with me. That's me engaging them. But beyond that, there's all kinds of questions. And before we're done here, in the little bit of time that we have left, I'm going to give you a handful of questions. And these are all questions that you could use at different times, in different ways, for different reasons, as there's many of them. We're only going to go through a few of them, but there's many of them. In fact, I don't know that anybody on the planet, including myself, has all the questions, even though some of us that have been doing this for a long time have a lot of questions that we've designed or that we've uncovered, that we've discovered because we've done this so many times with so many people over a long period of time now. So, 1, questions. We need to learn about questions. 2, we need to learn about tonality. Tonality. So when I'm speaking to whoever I'm speaking to, that I don't want my voice ultimately to be too monotone. I want to use what's known as in psychology, voice inflection. So I did a little sampling of that for you all earlier here in this video as well. Then number 3, we want to be able to respect the power of the transformative power that would be of the pause. So what that means is we don't want to be talking too fast, and we don't want to be like a drill sergeant, so to speak, and just one sentence after another sentence, or one question after another question, and so on and so forth. We want to be able to have a pause, or sometimes what we say, just take a breath, right? Take a breath and let whatever it is that just happened with that person kind of soak in a tad. Let them kind of absorb that for a moment. And where you just simply have a pause. Now, again, this is all skill. This is skill. It's skill that would require us to learn how to do. And then over time, we get better with this skill. So as we kind of dive into both the psychology of selling and the psychology of your customers, the psychology of selling and the psychology of your customers. And believe it or not, there is a psychology to selling, and there clearly is a psychology of that of your own customers. My question to you would be, do you know what the psychology of your customers are? You know what the psychology of selling or enrolling really is? My guess is most of you probably do, or at least you know it to some degree. And maybe today it's helping you a little bit move the needle forward and learning a little bit more about this. So sales, when well, I'm going to ask you a question. Would you say that sales are made, for the most part, based on logic? Or might sales be made, just in general, based on emotion? Now, if you answered with emotion, you nailed it. You nailed it. Studies continuously prove that we buy whatever it is we buy, for the most part, it's all based on emotion. It's all based on a feeling. In other words, for the most part, it is not based on logic. Now, when we look at the psychology of selling, or the psychology of customers, or even the psychology of what's known as buying, this is an important piece. Talk about another pillar that serves as a stronger foundation for us as we're getting better and better at this. So in selling, there's a thing called sales resistance. This sales resistance can also play into the unconscious resistance of the seller, the salesperson, or vice versa. The vendor working the booth could be in what's known as an unconscious resistance towards selling. Remember, that goes back to that question: what do you think of a salesperson when you think of a salesperson? What do you think of an enroller when you think of an enroller? And there's no right or wrong answer, but whatever your answer is, that answer will get projected onto whoever it is you're connecting with. So if I have a poor view of what I think a salesperson is, what I think an enroller is, what that ultimately would mean is that my unconscious resistance towards selling or enrolling is going to be much higher, which ultimately produces blocks, energetic blocks within my field of consciousness. So now here I am working as a vendor at the coming Expo, but I've got 3 energetic blocks. And more specifically, I've got 3 energetic blocks in my field of consciousness around this thing called unconscious resistance to selling my customers, or selling people as a way to get them to become a customer. Well, ultimately, that's not going to help me. That's not going to help me have impressive numbers by the end of the conference. So what can we do? Well, first of all, is to recognize that there's a psychology to this. And to that, if you have a difficult time seeing yourself as a salesperson because maybe you have a real negative view of a salesperson or a negative view of an enroller, then here's how you might see yourself. You might see yourself as a helper. You might see yourself as a helper. As a vendor in your booth, you're there not to sell, rather you're there to help people. You're there to help people to what? You're there to help people solve a problem. You're there to help people with whatever their pain is. You're there to help people achieve a gain, as in G-A-I-N, a gain, something that's positive for them. Selling on a psychological level, as you get deeper or higher within your own being, at some point you start to recognize that selling is a form of serving. I'm not just talking about selling the product. I'm talking about learning how to sell the product is another form of serving. Because as I get better at enrolling or selling, and if I really believe in my product or service, and if my product or service can really make a big difference in the life of this person that I'm connecting with right now, then why wouldn't I want to learn how to do this? And why couldn't I see this as a way of serving that person? By me getting better at the selling process, by me getting better at the enrolling process, that means I'm getting better at understanding the psychology of selling. I'm getting better at understanding the psychology of my customer so that I can serve them even more effectively. In this context, to serve them, to help them to see how and why my product or service could be of immense value to them. It could be life-changing for them. But therein lies this process. So speaking of this process, let's just highlight a little bit on the questions. So remember I gave you that piece, questions, tonality, and the power of the pause. So let's hone in a little bit on some type of questions that you might consider blending into your conversation. Now, I'm not saying these are the be-all, end-all, because there's many of them. There's many of them. But let's dive into at least a few of them. If for any reason it'll help to stimulate you, okay, this is what he's talking about. And maybe you can start to create your own questions if you haven't already. But the key that I'm emphasizing here is questions. Questions, questions, questions. They play an important part in the overall success of that generation or that process of generating a customer from that of a prospect. So you might say, describe whoever the prospect is. Let's say his name is John or her name is Mary. So you might say, Mary, go ahead and could you describe for me what you're possibly looking for, just to see if our product or service could assist you, could help you. Now, notice how I just did that. John, Mary. So first I call them by their name. Could you describe for me? Notice how I do that. Could you describe for me? See, it's very conversational. It's engaging and it's enrolling. What you possibly, so I'm not even assuming that I know what they're looking for. What you possibly might be looking for, just to see if our product or my service could be of assistance to you. Well, this is probably going to engage them in a conversation. In other words, you're probably going to have something to say about this. And then whatever they say, listen, because there's a good chance they're going to impart with something that's going to be meaningful for you. In other words, they're going to give something away. They're going to tell you around that idea of what it is that they're actually looking for. And they're probably not going to say they're looking for a phone. They might say, I'm looking for a phone to do this. Remember, it's not the phone that we're selling. It's what the phone does. That's what you want to be paying attention to. Like, what specifically do they believe that they're looking for? Because if they happen to say that they're looking for something that I know beyond a shadow of a doubt my product or service can help them with, come on, that's a great connection to make. As they're talking, I might intuitively sense there's more for them to share. So I might say to them, as a follow-up question to this, I might say, hey, Alice, could you go back just a bit in light of what you just shared with me so I can better understand what it is you're sharing with me right now? See what I just did? It just immediately, it causes them to go inward. Immediately, it gets them even more engaged. It immediately gets them to think more of their situation. See, believe it or not, selling is not talking. Now, of course, we're going to talk. But there's a basic rule with the real pros. And it goes something like this. 20% of any sales conversations is the salesperson or the enroller actually talking. Exactly. That means the other 80%, it's the customer or potential customer that's doing the talking during that sales conversation. So our job, if we're going to do this really well, is to basically get our potential customer talking. We want to find out a lot more about them than we end up telling them about us. If you and I were together right now, like belly to belly, and I could not only ask you questions, but then I would hear your answers and then I would respond to your answers. This is what you'd see me doing. I'm asking you questions. I want to learn about you. I want to be able to identify what your situation really is. I want to identify whatever it is that's going on that you would like to correct, change, transform, heal, resolve, whatever that might be. And you might not even know exactly what it is. In fact, a lot of people don't. And so perhaps maybe that's the value. Maybe that's the value they take from this sales conversation is, wow, you really helped me to get clearer on what it is that I'm actually looking for. And that's because I really place the focus on them, but not just as a way to talk to them, but as a way to ask questions, the right kind of questions that gets them to open up, that gets them to be more engaged, to get them also to be feeling like they're being enrolled. What are they being enrolled in? They're being enrolled in the possible solution to that of their problem. The solution being my product or service, their problem being something that they've been walking around on the planet with for the last 3.5 years. Boy, I'll tell you what, you learn how to make that connection, how to help them make that connection, you'll have sales all day long. Yeah. So let them talk. Once you ask the question, zip it up, let them talk. In other words, purposely do not interrupt them. Let them talk. And you listen. Listen. And if you're not very good at listening, then that might be one of your personal goals. Get better at listening. If your wife or husband tells you you're not a very good listener, if your kids tell you you're not a very good listener, if your parents tell you you're not a very good listener, if your best friend has told you you're not a very good listener, maybe pay attention to that. Because if you want to get better at becoming a more professional, highly effective vendor, then this would be a good place to practice, to apply the learning of that dynamic and getting better at listening. In this case, listening to your customers. Okay, I'll give you a couple other questions. Actually, before I do that, I'm going to do a couple things. I'm going to start to close it up now or wrap up our time here. So all buyers are motivated to buy or to not buy. In fact, most buyers are unconsciously motivated to buy whatever the product or service is based on one of two things. They're both four-letter words, uniquely enough. The only difference between these four-letter words is the first letter, P and G. As in, most customers are unconsciously motivated to buy either to have something relieve a pain that they're experiencing. That could be a financial pain, it could be a physical pain, it could be a relationship pain, an emotional pain, you get the idea. Or they're unconsciously motivated to buy to achieve some gain, a new gain, G-A-I-N. In 99.9% of the cases, it's one or the other. So, that being, depending on your product or service, what it does. And that's where, again, going back to that, one of the earlier questions that I presented, which is, what is most important to your customer about the thing that you are currently selling? What is most important? Is it more important to them that they get some kind of relief from their pain and ultimately resolve that pain? Or is it more important to them to achieve some kind of a gain? What is it? Again, it's 9.9 times out of 10 is one or the other. Do you know what it is? When you're working with somebody, as in you're enrolling them into a sales conversation, an enrolling conversation, so to speak, how do you know? When do you know what the unconscious motivation is? Well, I would say from my own perspective, I don't know this until I'm well into the conversation. And what that really implies is by the time I'm well into the sales conversation, we've gone through, I don't know, at least a half a dozen questions, which is constantly opening them up. It's getting them to expand. It's getting them in touch with what's really going on inside of them. It's getting them in touch with what it is they really would like to accomplish. And then for me, what I'm doing is I'm paying close attention to see if there's a connection. Like, is there a bridge here? Is there a connecting point to that of what they're specifically looking for and to that of what my product or service actually provides? That's what I'm looking for. Because once I know there's a connection, then I'm going to go into what's called bridging. And the whole conversation is going to shift more into a bridge where I'm going to bridge them to a place where I'm going to help them to do what I call get connected to a future possibility that becomes profoundly meaningful for them, not for me, but for them. So to that, again, now I'm just going to give you a smorgasbord of a couple more questions here as we start to wrap up. When I'm speaking with somebody and I can tell that let's say they're wrestling around with attempting to articulate whatever their problem is. So I might just interject and I might say, hey, Joanne, what seems to be the real problem here? So again, I'm not assuming. It's not a super direct question. It's a little more on the indirect side, so it's softer. And all of a sudden it stops them and sometimes the Freudian slip comes out and they nail it right there. Remember, I'm helping them. I'm not just helping me to get clear on what their problem is. I'm helping them to get clear on what their problem is, as well as myself to get clear on what the problem is. Because until we identify what the problem is, or what the want is, what the desire is, as in that game, and then assuming that there really is a connection here to that of what they're looking for and to that of what my product provides, in other words, what my product or service actually does, then I'm going to start the bridging process. I might say to them, here's more of a kind of a closing question. I might say at some point, hey, Robert, and now we've been talking for a while and I've asked a half a dozen questions and Robert's really gotten engaged and you can kind of tell he's pretty much there. And I might say something like, hey, Robert, could you see this working for you? This meaning the product. So I might plug that in as well. Could you see this? And then I'll articulate this. So whatever my service is or product is, whatever your service is, whatever your product is, could you see this working for you? Yeah, I think I could right away. Where or how do you see this possibly working for you, Robert? Again, get him talking. That's when he's engaged. And it's the engagement that then leads to the enrollment. And so now he's volunteering even more information because he's telling you what he's actually thinking inside. So now you don't have to guess. You don't have to guess what Robert's thinking because of the power specific question. He literally, or she, starts to give it to you. Then at that point, if he or she is, pretty much there, now I might have a real soft, more oriented closing question. Remember the minor yeses that lead to the major yes. So I might point blank at this point, depending on how the conversation is going. I might say, hey, John, how would you feel about going ahead and giving us a try? Yeah, I think I'm ready. I might then say, as in ready, as in today. Yep, I'm ready. I'm ready. That's the major yes. A really soft approach. It's very natural, very organic. I don't start off that way, of course. This is later on in the sales conversation. I might, here's another, again, I'm just giving you some samples here. So I might say, hey, Tina, we've spoken a lot here today, or if I'm in the booth for the last 20 minutes, if I'm understanding you correctly, what I've heard you say is, and then I'll repeat that back. And it sounds like our product, or looks like our product or service, could really be of assistance to you. Yeah, I think so too, Dale. Well, then how would you like to proceed from here? Well, what's your process? And literally, I'll have people say to me, "What, do you take credit cards? Or can I write you out a check? Or can I give you cash?" So you could take that approach. Another approach, I'll give you one more here, is hey, Ann, if you were to buy today, or if you were to place an order with me here today, what's the first thing you'd want it to do for you? Boy, this one is, it's one of my favorite. It's natural, it's organic, it gets an immediate response, but more specifically, it gets them talking about what my product or service will end up doing for them, because they end up telling me what the very first thing is they would like to have it do for them. Again, assuming I know in my bones that my product or service can truly help them, then we're really onto something. We're really onto something that's quite grand here, which means now I can move into the bridge. So 2 final points. I'll just kind of span over these on purpose. And the first one is your follow-up strategy. So you've now worked the show. We're at the end of the show. You've collected X number of leads that you're going to input into your database when you get back to your office. What's your follow-up strategy? What's your follow-up strategy? Now, I've helped many companies or business owners design all kinds of follow-up strategies that are unique to them. So that's number one. You want your follow-up strategy to be unique to you as an entrepreneur. Number two, you want to execute on your follow-up strategy with the leads that you generated from this experience you just had as a vendor coming out of this expo within 48 hours. Within 48 hours. So if you come out of the expo on a Sunday night, by Wednesday morning at the latest, preferably Tuesday afternoon, you want to be fully launched in with the execution of whatever your follow-up strategy is going to be with those prospects that you have generated from that expo. This is a real key here. In fact, in the world of selling, we refer to this as a gold mine. We say that the gold, the real gold, when it comes to generating a new happy paying customer, is found in the follow-up. It's found in the follow-through. And now on to the last step, or the last idea that I would like to share with you here today. Also in the form of a question. Have you become a product of your own product yet? Have you become a product of your own product yet? Now, on the surface, I know this might even sound kind of elementary. This question turns out to be another, not just powerful, but a very transformative question. Remember when I was referring to that idea of projecting or energy transference? Well, this also holds true here, is that we have salespeople or people that are enrolling people into a product or service that they're to be representing. where they clearly have not become a product of their own product. Not saying it's bad. What I'm saying, however, is if you want better results, if you want to close more sales or generate more happy paying customers, then you're going to want to level this up. And at the very least, you're going to want to re-examine where are you at with you having become the product of your own product. Your own product being the product that you are to be representing, the product you are to be promoting, the product you are offering or service. Where are you really at? Those that are at the top of their game are clearly in that place where they have become totally the product of their own product. So whatever they're putting out into the world, they ultimately utilize for themselves. And they love their product. They love their service. What's also actually more interesting is what happens when you have somebody who doesn't yet have a lot of experience presenting that product or service. They're new, they're learning about the product or service, but somehow they got to this place sooner of having become the product of their own product. That person will clearly end up selling more, generating more customers, and in some cases, to that of his or her colleagues, other professional salespeople who have been selling the exact same product and service for like 5 years, and this new person has only been doing it for maybe months, maybe a whole year, and they're outperforming them sometimes 2 to 1. It's absolutely amazing. So much so that others have been called in to study this. How could that be? How could it be that somebody has 5 years of experience promoting their service or product, and yet somebody new comes in that now has 5 months, or in some cases even 5 weeks experience, and begins to outperform the one who has 5 years experience by 2 to 1? How could that possibly be? They don't have, time has not gone by to gather, to gain that level of experience of having done this for that period of 5 years. How is it? Well, for anybody that's built sales organizations, I mean, large sales organizations, they already know the answer to this question. And which is that person, that new person, has become a product of the product. And however they got there, they got to this place sooner than the one who's been around for 5 years, basically doing something similar, representing, promoting, marketing, whatever the product or service is. That's what they share in common. Yet the new person will outperform them. It's because of this. And what this really comes down to is that they believe so much in their product or service, as in they believe that this product or service is going to help their customer in a way that's very specific, and it could be multiple, but it's very specific. They believe it to the point where that belief has permeated, penetrated every single cell that makes up their physical form, which is well over 50 trillion cells. They literally become their own product. And when we become the product that we are bringing to the marketplace, we just get an extra. Then that's the bottom line. And it's a positive dynamic, totally positive dynamic. We get an extra versus the person who's working their booth, who maybe likes their products, knows a little bit about their products, knows a little bit about those products, and possibly has an experience with those products, meaning they've worked a couple of shows, maybe 10 shows before. And yet all of a sudden this new person comes along 5 months into the business, and they show up at that booth for that particular show, and they outperform the ones who have all the experience. It's their belief. One has a belief in the product or service, and more specifically, what the product or service actually does for the people that they are selling the product or service to. Their belief is is much stronger and even more passionate within the cells, the 50 trillion cells that make up their physical form, than that of the person, believe it or not, that's been around for 5 years. That becomes the difference maker. So you can begin to imagine what happens with that new person who has now become the product of the product, benefiting from that by that of their results, as in constantly generating new paying, wonderful, happy, satisfied customers. But you begin to imagine, what can that person do over the next 5 years if in fact they were to stay on track, on point, and gain the experience and learn some of the things that we've been focused on just even here today, and really start to integrate these things, these teachings, these principles into their way of approaching the sales conversation, the enrolling conversation that they enter into with a potential buyer. What is their potential? How far could they go? What could they accomplish if they were to really, really now gain that experience? By the same token, what would happen if the person who already has the experience recognizes that maybe they haven't become a full product yet of their own product, and they were to choose to now do so and become that product of their own product, and be able to have that integrate into the cells of their physical form. And now their come from has completely transformed. In other words, prior to this, they've had 5 years of good experience, but their come from is not this come from. This come from, now we're talking about a whole nother level here. We're talking about a whole nother level in belief, in the power of believing in what my product or service does for people that I'm contacting, for people that I'm engaging in conversation with. Whoa, now the one who's been around for 5 years, all of a sudden, wherever his or her current sales results are, within a matter of maybe 90 days, all of a sudden, their results are improving. Their sales results, that is. Their numbers are increasing by 10%, 20%, 30%, all within a period of only 90 days. Wow. That's what's possible. That's what's clearly possible for any of us that really are serious, shall we say, that are genuinely interested in really wanting to get better at this, so that as another form of serving our fellow man, our fellow woman, we can serve them at even a better level, a richer level, in learning how to do this, because now what that does, it increases the odds. It increases the odds that for every 10 people I originally come into contact with, way back when, maybe only 2 of the 10 would become a happy customer. As a result of learning how to do this and actually getting better at this, all of a sudden, I now am still talking to 10 people or connecting with 10 people at a time. The difference is before 2 out of 10, now 4 out of 10. I've doubled my numbers. I've increased them by 100%. Still talking, connecting with 10 people. The difference is now whenever I connect with 10 new people, instead of only 2 becoming a happy customer, 4 of them become a happy customer. Wow. Wow. Talk about a great ROI. Talk about a great return on investment. So with that, I'm going to sign off. Again, this is Dale Halaway, and I look forward to perhaps meeting some of you. As it turns out, my company is going to be there at Sheila's coming Expo here soon. And so if you like and you're inspired to, please come by and introduce yourself. I'd love to meet you and shake your hand, and maybe we can have a 5 or 10 minute conversation also about your business or how well you're doing as a vendor at our coming Expo here with Sheila. So until then, have an awesome one, everybody. I'll look forward to hopefully us crossing paths here soon. Thank you.